what you want, when you want it, where you want it. This is The Mesh. Footcandle Films. Film reviews and discussion from two guys who really like movies. This episode is brought to you by the Footcandle Film Society. Do you enjoy seeing interesting movies that you may not see anywhere else? Taking part in discussions about those films and live in Western North Carolina? Then you need to come be a part of the Footcandle Film Society. For a schedule of upcoming screenings and membership information, visit the Society's website at www.footcandle.org.
Hello and welcome to Footcandle Films for November 2011. I am Alan, and with me is Chris.
Hello.
Chris, how are you doing today, bud?
Doing good.
Good. Ready to talk about some movies?
Of course.
All right. Well, here's what we've got on tap for today. First off, we're going to be hitting our main feature review, which is the film Project Nim. We'll be discussing in a moment. Followed by that, we're going to be talking over some movie news, a couple of items of interest in the movie production industry, some interesting film ideas we want to talk about from a news standpoint. Then we'll be moving on at the end to each of us giving our film recommendation for the month. This is a film that's either can be a new film, can be an old film, doesn't matter, just something we think you ought to be checking out. So without further ado, how about let's go ahead and jump right into our main feature review, the documentary Project Nim.
I thought, wouldn't it be exciting to communicate with the chimp and find out what it was thinking? So why not teach him sign language? And that's essentially why I started Project Nim.
I know nothing about chimpanzees. Herb wanted me to take Nim into my home as if he were a child. The fact that we could share language with an animal seemed very radical at that time.
There was no family discussion. It was just, oh, we're having a chimp. We're going to teach it sign language. Nobody in the house really was fluent in sign language.
So with the documentary Project Nim, this is the follow-up. I'm not even going to say it's the second film because I know he's done several other films, but the director of the documentary Man on Wire, which is the one where he's probably gotten the most recognition lately, but James Marsh, documentarian, as well as he produces some and directs some dramatic films as well. So it's not just documentary films he makes. Man on Wire, Chris, I know you were a fan of this film.
Yes, big fan.
It came out a couple of years ago. Did win Best Documentary, I believe, at the Oscars 2 years ago. Back 2009?
Actually, 2008, I think.
Okay, so even farther back. So this is his film Project Nim. And it's a documentary that takes place primarily with a story that happened back in the 70s. And this has to do with a group of researchers who decide, wisely or unwisely, to try to raise a chimpanzee in a human environment to see what the effects would be on that chimpanzee. With a real focus on the language, trying to get the chimpanzee to have human-like communications and dialogue or be able to share thoughts and opinions with the humans it resided with. Being a documentary, obviously you're going to have the facts and you're going to have the story and you're going to have some level of conflict to make it an interesting story. We've got all of that going on in this documentary.
For sure.
We definitely have some emotion. We definitely have a lot of facts and information. And a lot of this film is carried by interviews. So very little, I don't think any overhead narration. I mean, this is all driven by the interviews that were conducted for this documentary. Am I right in saying that? I don't remember there being any narrator talking through facts at all. This is truly, everything was done through the voice of those people interviewed for the documentary.
Right.
Okay. So with that, whenever we review a documentary, I mean, it's an interesting animal in itself in that you can review it from a subject matter standpoint, how it made you feel about the topic and the subject, and you can look at it from a film standpoint, how well it was put together, how well it was made. So let's tackle the film side first, Chris. We're not getting into the subject matter and how it was presented, but from a documentary, and especially comparing it to Man on Wire, how did this work as a documentary film to you?
Well, I felt like they had to do some, not every documentary, but in many documentaries, there are recreation segments.
Yes.
And in Man on Wire, they had them there as well. But I didn't feel like they were as weighted as the ones in this documentary were that showed different aspects of the story. I felt like these were a little bit more kind of heavy-handed the way they were portrayed, and I didn't really like that. I felt like basically the director kind of tipped his hand pretty early on, actually, kind of in the first scene, as far as where his intentions were, as far as how to make you feel and how to interpret what was happening. And I would say that that's probably one of my hangups about the film, is that I felt like sometimes he was putting his opinion. I mean, everybody has an opinion. And when you're a documentarian and you're a director, your opinion is probably still going to show through.
Sure.
But I was surprised at how it showed through. Whereas in Man on Wire, I feel like it was pretty open.
cut.
There wasn't really an opinion there. You know, it wasn't. And
It was just telling what happened and helping illustrate what happened.
It was documenting as opposed to documenting and commenting. And I felt like
so you felt like this film was a little bit of, yes, it was documenting to some degree, but it was putting a lot more opinion in there.
Yes.
To kind of sway that a bit.
Yeah.
Now, what you were referring to about some of these stage pieces, I guess for those that may not be too familiar with documentaries in general, you know, obviously with a documentary, you want everything footage-wise and everything to be as factual and as real as possible.
Right.
But of course, they were not recording every single thing that happened back in the 1970s on film.
Correct.
So for some scenes where they really wanted to help show what was going on at that time, they did have to recreate some scenes. They were minimal, I agree.
They were pretty minimal.
But the ones that they did use were somewhat impactful and very set an emotional tone.
And like you had mentioned, they were narrated, but they were narrated by somebody's interview. So it wasn't like this, you know, ambiguous narrator. It was somebody retelling the story, and then you would see scenes of it happening, unfolding.
Well, and with the story itself, obviously they're documenting this experiment, this research project that involved a young chimpanzee, and you know, they showed both the highs and the lows of this experiment and where it ended up in the end. And we're not going to spoil endings of it to know how it ended for anybody involved. But there's a lot of people that came into contact with this animal and with the project over the years. Right. I do believe it looks like they did a pretty good job of getting a good cross-section of the people involved in the project. I thought, you know, as far as the different stages of time that the research project went through, they got some good representation throughout those years and were able to get some good candid interviews with everybody. But in itself, kind of going to what your comment about how it still was very opinionated about the director's, you know, feelings toward this subject.
Right.
I do feel like that the one or two people that maybe we are to perceive as somewhat of the bad guy in this film were edited to very much look like the bad guy in this film, where all of the good people that we were supposed to cheer for had a lot more positive impact on the film and were portrayed in a much more of a positive light. That's probably going to happen with any documentary when you interview people. If you as a filmmaker kind of know your angle already, you're going to subconsciously pick some of the worst pieces and to profile the people you think as the villains, and some of the better pieces to profile the people you think are the heroes.
Right.
So it's a little bit of, it's a subjective nature of documentaries, but I do think this one started to venture a little more into that opinionated territory than maybe I had wanted it to.
Sure.
Beyond that part of the film, Chris, from a technical standpoint, the use of the shots, the use of archival footage, the editing itself, what did you think about some of that?
The setup of the interviews was good. I liked the way they, depending on where the story was going with the but the person they were interviewing, they would kind of come in and show the person, and the person would talk, and then they would kind of go away, pull back and go away. And it kind of symbolized them coming into Nim, the monkey or chimpanzee's life, and then them disappearing or fading out from his life. So that was an interesting technique. I like
the use, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I like the use of also when each person was interviewed, they actually were looking at the camera right before their interview and did sign language of their name.
Right.
Almost just a verbal cue. That's how they communicate with the chimpanzee. So we get a little bit of that tie-in with the audience as well. I thought was a nice technical touch to it.
Yeah. Yeah. And the use of the graphics that they would use to explain how many words the chimp was learning and different things. That was
some
effective.
nice infographic work there. So.
Kind of commenting though, and there again, the commentary that the director seemed to be making on how he would light certain people, and that I did not like. And actually, there's an example of a person who is, when he's first shown, is kind of lit unflatteringly, and he looks like an evil person.
Right.
And then you come to find out that this person actually, in the end, is more helpful than you would have thought.
Yes.
And I guess you want to make a film entertaining, but from my value, especially in a documentary. Just let everything be, shoot everyone the same, treat everybody, try to be as impartial as possible. And that was an example of getting back to where I felt like, but, in general, camera technique, the graphics I liked. I remember not being that, I felt like the music at sometimes, not editing the shots, but editing of the music was a little over the top.
Oh, really?
It was a little heavy-handed. Yeah, to make you feel certain things.
I don't really remember the music. And I guess for me, that was a good thing, that for a documentary, I don't really want to remember the music unless it was part of the archival footage.
Right.
Because I feel like music you throw in generally with the idea of trying to create a certain emotion with your audience. And that's the last thing I want a documentary to do. Right. I want to be able to form my own opinions by watching it. So I don't remember the music. So I guess that was a good thing for me. Yeah. I personally, I was okay with the film. I'm not going to say I loved it. I'm not going out and recommending it to a lot of friends and family that enjoy documentaries, but I do think there's something of value here. I think the story itself, which we can talk about the actual subject matter just briefly, but I think the concept itself, the storyline, I thought was interesting. That's probably more of a personal thing for me. I'm very fascinated by these experiments to try to tap into animal communication and find out how we're like humans or not like humans. So in general, I was already bought into the subject matter. Mm-hmm. My beef with the film is it just didn't really tell me a lot of things I didn't already know. It didn't really help. It didn't dig as deep as I would have liked for it to into the actual training and teaching of the chimpanzee. But I also don't think that was the director's intent. I think the director was really trying to make more of an intent to comment on humans and human behavior than he ever had any desire to talk about chimpanzees and how they communicate and how we can learn to communicate with them better.
Well, and apparently I did a little bit of research on kind of the outcomes of this experiment and how people interpret it in the scientific world. And apparently a lot of the research is still very highly contested as far as what they proved, what they didn't prove, their motives behind it. It's apparently very, up in the air as far as what was actually determined. So, yeah, I think for that reason, the director didn't really go into too much the how they were doing things. They're just kind of showing these people. And it definitely provides more of a record of people trying to accomplish certain goals and how they go about doing so, their motives. And it shows more about people than it does about monkeys and whether or not they can really talk.
I thought hubris was kind of the topic of the day. It's just those people who felt like they were doing things and wanted to do it for their own personal glory or because of the recognition it gave them or their own personal satisfaction and not necessarily thinking about how it affected others, how it affected the animal even to some degree. There was a family in particular, for anybody who's seen the film or you'll see it pretty early on in the film. One of the first families to keep this baby. I think the family itself had its own issues to begin with, let alone throwing a chimpanzee in the mix, from that standpoint. So that was just kind of interesting to begin with. And to me, bringing in that chimpanzee, offering to be part of that research project showed more about their need for self-recognition than it was of really doing the right thing for each other and for this animal. So
you commented on how you liked or you felt like they got a pretty good cross-section of people that had interactions with this chimp throughout the whole time span that they were documenting. Actually, not during the film, but afterwards when I started to kind of process what I'd seen, I wish that they would have had more people from the family.
Well, yes,
because they had a daughter and they had the mom, but it was a fairly large
It was
family.
a large family. They didn't touch on any of the father role or stepfather role in this.
Which I don't know if he's deceased or I don't know. I don't know. And I wish I would have known because I think some of that aspects, because it was just very one-sided.
Yes, it was.
You had a lot of researcher versus the guy who started the project. You had a lot of those dynamics going on, like differing opinions. But as far as someone removed, you only had the daughter, I guess, basically.
Mm-hmm. Right. That's
it. I would have liked for more
I could have seen that. I could have seen that, sure. Overall, I thought it was an adequate documentary. Just I was let down after how wonderful Men on Wire it was. Mm-hmm. And I'm a big fan of documentaries in general. And this one was just a very average documentary. I think it portrayed a story. It told us the pertinent information. It didn't go much deeper than it needed to. And it did bring a lot more opinion into the mix than I think I'd like to see in a documentary in general.
But definitely from a technical standpoint, very well made.
Well made.
Well crafted
yes.
and well made. It's just, I think we're kind of on the same page that I would have preferred for a little more meat to the documentary.
A little more meat and a little less opinion. I guess that's what we were looking for in general with that.
In our previous review, granted it was based on a novel, so it was fiction, but it recounted a little bit of a true event. Sarah's Key, you mentioned how you would have preferred to see a documentary of that as opposed to, a fictitious movie made out from a novel. With this, it was based on a book that this woman wrote about the whole Project NIM process.
Right.
Having seen this documentary, do you think it was good that they went ahead and made a documentary and didn't try to, make a movie based on a book and all that kind of stuff?
Well,
how
the
would
thing
you
is, though,
fall on that?
Comparing this documentary, Project NIM, to what could have been a more dramatic interpretation of the book, I wouldn't have seen a whole lot of difference because I really think a dramatic...
See, that actually tells me that that's coming down really harsh on the documentary then.
Yeah, well, because you could have made a dramatic film out of this with actors and it would have conveyed the same level of emotion. It would have conveyed the same level of information, I thought, as the documentary did. Where I wish this documentary had gone is a little deeper into truly some of the ramifications, some of the impact, some of the training that was going through and how it affected people a little bit deeper than what we saw. As it is now, you could have probably swapped this with a dramatic interpretation and it would have given me no more or less information on the story.
Right.
Where Sarah's Key, where we talked about, yes, I think a documentary would have handled that better in my mind to learn about that situation than what we got in that dramatic interpretation. So anyway, yeah. But more than anything, I think the book is probably still the way to go for this one.
Sure.
Because I think the book is probably going to go into a lot more detail about this than we got in the film.
Right.
Now, have you seen Rise of the Planet of the Apes?
No, which, when I looked at things online, people were kind of making references.
Well, it was just interesting. They both came out at the same time. Very similar theme, of course, one in a science fiction, more dramatic more Hollywood style film versus the documentary. I thought it was interesting. They both came out about the same time, and the reviews were actually, I think, a little bit better for Rise of the Planet of the Apes than they were for this documentary, if that tells you anything. So, yeah, interesting situation. Overall, Project NIM, adequate documentary, but nothing really to write home about. Not anything we were terribly impressed with, but a good, serviceable documentary about a very interesting story. I will give it that. It's a very interesting subject matter and topic for me, at least. So that's director James Marsh's Project NIM. Still making some circuits with theater screenings right now.
So.
Should be on DVD, and I would imagine probably Netflix here in the next maybe 4 to 5 months as well. So I encourage you to check it out if you're at all interested, and sounds like this is something that might fit your interest. So we're going to take a quick break. We'll come back in a moment with some movie news and our recommendations of the month. Stay tuned.
We'll get back to your show in a moment. Just a reminder, you're listening to The Mesh, an online media network of shows and programs ranging from business to arts, sports to entertainment, music to community. All programs are available on the website as well as through iTunes and YouTube. Find out more at themesh.tv and give us feedback on what you like. And now, as promised, back to your show.
Hello and welcome back to Footcandle Films. Now that we're through our main review part of the show, we like to toss out a few headlines, some things we stumble across through the World Wide Web regarding some upcoming films or movie-related news. And a lot of times I have fun with this, and then we like to pick out items that we have not told each other about yet. So I always like to get kind of initial reactions from Mr. Chris Fry.
Surprises.
So Chris, let me just fire away at the news items, and you tell me what you think, and we'll bounce around some ideas there.
Okay.
First one has to do with the director I know you're a big fan of, Steven Soderbergh.
Ah.
Okay, so he has a film coming out fairly soon here. It's being promoted called Haywire. You familiar with it at all?
No.
Okay.
He just did Contagion, which I haven't had a chance to see.
Did Contagion, and this is for somebody who supposedly was going to retire a while back. Well, he's definitely not retiring. I'm going to list off all the projects he's got coming up pretty soon. But the one coming out soon called Haywire, this is going to be interesting. It's an action movie.
Okay.
And it stars a person called Gina Serrano, which the fact that I probably didn't pronounce her name right means that I do not follow worldwide fighting competitions because she is an authentic fighter. She fights in competitions. Okay. She is the star of this action movie.
Okay.
Also stars Channing Tatum and Michael Fassbender.
Okay.
So it is a true thriller action movie. She is basically either a hitman or somebody who has to extract revenge on some people. And it's from the trailer, it's a lot of kicking and fighting and all that. Very different for a Steven Soderbergh film, but I'm still very curious, especially with Michael Fassbender in it. Michael Fassbender, I'm still huge fan of right now. I loved him in X-Men First Class. Really liked him in Inglourious Basterds.
Small role, but still good.
Small role, but very, very, very good role.
Yeah.
And he's been in a few other pieces, a few other things I think he did extraordinarily well. So having him in a Soderbergh film, I'm very curious with that one. Now, if you remember, Soderbergh kind of did the same thing with bringing in a porn star to star in the Girlfriend Experiment.
Right.
Yeah. So bringing in a non-actress, well, okay, maybe some form of actress, but not necessarily the kind of actress we're normally seeing in films.
Sure.
And putting her into a very dramatic role where she's required to act. Here we've got someone who, from what I can tell, has not done any acting other than maybe some small parts, but she is known as a professional fighter in a world fighting circuit. So interesting choices. Once again, any thoughts, any curiosities there for you? Is that pique your interest?
I would not have been interested in seeing, if you would have just described the movie and not said anything about the director, I'd have been like, okay, I'm kind of done with that whole Jason Bourne, which I liked those okay. But, in general, action movie with like people going around kicking stuff, things blowing up, that doesn't really appeal to me.
Sure.
However, Steven Soderbergh involved, I'll probably at some point see it. It seems as if he's doing his first experiment with doing like non-actors and anything was Bubble, which I really liked a lot. Then he did... He did the Girlfriend Experiment. I think he did maybe one other thing before that where he did like non-traditional stuff, but definitely Girlfriend Experiment was a non-traditional act. I never saw that. But I'm interested. I guess maybe that's how he's keeping himself energized, so that he still wants to make movies. He's kind of like challenging himself to do like non-traditional things. So I don't know. I mean, I'm interested.
What's your favorite Soderbergh film?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
The Limey, maybe?
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I really like that.
Nice.
I mean, the Ocean's movies, or at least the first two.
The first one was fun.
Were good. I don't know.
Well,
I just
Out of Sight is my favorite. I still love Out of Sight.
Yeah.
Out of Sight with George Clooney and Jennifer Lopez. Very, very good movie. So
yeah. I mean, he's one of those directors that I like his work. I know he does, but he's not. I wouldn't list him as like a favorite. So all of his movies just kind of fall in to be about the same. Like I really like Solaris too.
Oh yeah, that was good.
Even though it was a remake,
Sure.
but
not as good as the original, but still.
So yeah, I don't know.
Well, let me just tell you this. You mentioned Contagion being his last film. He's actually got 3 more.
Wow.
Already in production.
Oh yeah, he's retiring. Right?
Yeah, exactly. I don't think that's going to happen. Well, here's the deal. There's a little bit of a connection with one of the other shows on the Mesh. That I think they mentioned this movie upcoming, which I didn't make the connection. They described a male stripper movie starring Channing Tatum in the Chick Chat show a couple months ago. That's a Soderbergh film called Magic Mike. And that is Steven Soderbergh's directing a film starring Channing Tatum about his role as a male stripper. Also with, what's the bongo guy's name? Dazed and Confused. Matthew McConaughey's also in it. So
is Channing Tatum becoming the new
George Clooney?
George Clooney,
yeah, it could be. I don't know.
Maybe?
That's one film. He's doing a new updated version of The Man from U.N.C.L.E. And here's one I find fascinating: a movie about Liberace, starring Michael Douglas.
Wow.
Yeah.
That actually could be pretty genius casting.
Could be. So I'm very curious. Those are the 3 right now listed as in production, attached to Steven Soderbergh as director.
Yep.
Now, anything could change.
I may go ahead and say, if that Liberace thing happens, I think Michael Douglas might win an Oscar for it.
Yeah.
I'm
curious.
I'm gonna go ahead and say.
I know I'm speculating a lot here off of just one little note I saw about on IMDb about production work, but my question is, if you're going to do a film about Liberace, well, obviously Michael Douglas can't play Liberace younger. He can only really play him, I would imagine, at the current age he is. Right. I don't know. I'd be surprised if they're going to have different actors playing different stages of his life, maybe. Could be. Or maybe they're just going to talk about later in life.
Or it'll be like he's reflecting back over
stuff. Could be.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
There again, a lot of speculation. I have seen Soderbergh films where he has signed on to do it and then he pulls out and changes. And so anything's possible. But right now, those are 3 coming up on his slate.
Was he originally going to do Moneyball?
Yes, he was.
Okay.
He was going to do Moneyball, the baseball movie. He was signed on to do that and then changed gears.
He backed out.
Yes. So that was going to be his project with Brad Pitt for a while. Anyway, Steven Soderbergh, we're done with that part of the news. Next, let's flip-flop a little bit. This is not about a film, but it is film-related, and I'm very anxious to hear your opinions. The Oscars, the big film ceremony of the Oscars. Well, there's been a little brouhaha lately with the hosting situation. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not.
A little bit.
Supposedly, they had Eddie Murphy lined up to host the Oscars, which I was ecstatic about because I'm a big Eddie Murphy apologist. I feel like one day Eddie Murphy is going to get back on top in the comedy world, and I keep waiting for that day to happen.
And he has a movie out, right?
He has a movie out called Tower Heist, which is doing okay. And it seems like it's probably a little closer to form for him, back to more of that, a little more outrageous comedy and a little more sassy character type of thing.
As opposed to like Nutty Professor and Dr. Dolittle.
It's not a kid's movie.
Right.
Okay.
Gotcha.
So I was excited. I thought maybe this year is Eddie Murphy's year to get back in the limelight. He's making another comedy movie that's more adult themed. He hosts the Oscars and gets to do stand up, which we've never seen. We have not seen Eddie Murphy do stand up in years.
Yeah.
So I was all excited. Brett Ratner, who is his director for Tower Heist, the film he just did.
Okay, I didn't know he was the
And
director.
Brett Ratner also did the Rush Hour movies and a bunch of other movies that I don't care for. I'm not a big fan of Brett Ratner. Well, Brett Ratner was going to be the producer of the Oscar ceremony. Brett Ratner said some inappropriate things in a public forum recently regarding people's sexuality and some derogatory terms towards that. Got lambasted for that. So he has stepped down now as producer, and alongside being stepped down, Eddie Murphy bailed out also as host of the Oscars. So I'm a little let down by that.
Yeah.
In resolution here, guess who's coming back to host it now?
I think I heard Billy Crystal.
Billy Crystal's back hosting the Oscars this year. So thoughts, opinions, do you care at all?
Well, I do. I mean, because I do watch it. So, I think Eddie Murphy probably would have been better.
Yeah.
But last year I felt like, I don't know, Billy Crystal, I think he's very capable, but I've seen him do it so many times. I'm kind of, tired of seeing. At one point, didn't Steve Martin and Alec Baldwin host it together?
They did. They hosted it together 2 years ago.
Okay. I wish they could do that again because I think that was, it's enough break because you have two different people. Whereas, last year they were trying to pull in the younger audience. I didn't think that really worked.
Last year didn't work. Last year was horrible.
No. So, actually, if a host would just say up front, I really am going to keep this telecast short, I'd like it no matter what they did, even if they were very boring and didn't do any jokes. I'd appreciate that.
It is
more.
a long show. It's a very
is.
long show. We always have a good time, or at least we did last year, and we will again this year. Our film society here in the Western North Carolina, we actually go to a local restaurant and watch the Oscars together up on a big screen and talk about it in between breaks and all that. So I look forward to it. It's fun. It's kind of for movie geeks. It's our Super Bowl in a way. And it's got its problems, just like the Super Bowl. It's way too long, way too many advertisements, way too many parts of the show that don't work. But it's still, you're pulling for the best film and the best director to get out there and do some good stuff. So, we have fun with it. I just was kind of curious about that. There's some news there from the Oscar world. So come early next year, it looks like we'll be seeing Mr. Crystal once again taking over as host on the Oscars and see how that goes. All right, third item. And on the news side, I've got Rian Johnson. I know you and I are both big fans of Brick. You actually gave The Brothers Bloom, his second film, as your recommendation in one of our earlier episodes, which I wholeheartedly agree with. I love that film as well. So he has his third film coming out soon. Do you know anything about this? It's called Looper.
Yeah, and the only reason I know something about it is because the plot line sounded a little bit similar to Primer.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think, did you even mention this when you were talking about Primer last month? I don't know if you did or not, but yeah, it's very similar. And that's actually why I wanted to bring it up, because you mentioned Primer as your pick, a time travel movie last month. Well, this is another time travel film starring Bruce Willis, and it also has Joseph Gordon-Levitt as the younger version of Bruce Willis's character. Supposedly there is there's a time travel element where people from the future travel back in time, and there's something to do with hitmen who are charged with picking off these people as they come back from the future. And if you don't, something bad happens. And it sounds like a very convoluted, complex time travel plot. However, terribly excited, Rian Johnson. If you have not seen Brick, his first directorial film, you need to go check that out. Not only did it star Joseph Gordon-Levitt in kind of a breakout role for him, turning him into a real serious actor, but it was just a really cool movie.
Yeah.
It was a noir film set in a modern day high school environment,
Right.
With all the cliches you get from a typical film noir film. It was great. It was a really good film. Actually, you were the one that kind of turned me on to wanting to see that, and we saw it
Good.
together.
Yeah.
And then Brothers Bloom, we showed at the Footcandle Film Society a couple years ago, and that was also, I thought, a great film.
Mm-hmm.
So Looper, I'm terribly excited. Sounds like he's kind of ratcheting it up a little bit each film he does.
Mm-hmm.
Brick was very small, low budget, with very little known actors in it. Then you've got Brothers Bloom with some better known actors and a little more budget. Now, I would imagine with Bruce Willis, now Joseph Gordon-Levitt being a much bigger star, science fiction, time travel, it's definitely ratcheted up there.
You know, I've heard him, which I heard that with Looper, I think he has Shane Carruth, who was the writer and director of Primer. I think he's acting as he helped Rian Johnson on the movie.
You know, I think you mentioned that. I think you did mention that in last month's episode about your pick.
I'm
Yeah.
glad that from the more information you've given me about kind of what seems to be the plot, it's not like they're doing a remake, which is awesome, but at least he's going to have Shane Carruth giving him kind of like interesting ideas to incorporate into his movie. I think it sounds really, really, really good. And I'm interested to see Bruce Willis be in a good movie again. So
Yeah, supposedly the title Looper, and this is just what I've been reading online. The Looper refers to hitmen who have been contracted by gangsters like 30 years or more off in the future.
Okay.
Where time travel has been banned. It exists, but it's been banned.
So it's
to dispose of people where no one would possibly know to look for them. In other words, the loopers hang out in these back alleys and other places, and they wait for their quarry to come in, and then they blast them the second they materialize. And yeah, already it's giving me a headache even thinking through it. Time travel movies typically give me big migraines to think through. But this does sound really interesting, though.
What would you think? It seems to me like Rian Johnson, in the 3 movies he's made, he made kind of a noir movie, but made it in high school. Okay, so that was his first movie.
Yeah.
Then he made Brothers Bloom, which was like a heist movie, but yet he kind of put his own little spin on it, made it a fun heist movie, kind of like a comedy, yet it was a heist movie. I guess in a way like Ocean's 11, but still very different.
A little more quirky, though.
Yeah, a little quirky. And then with this movie, it's like he's putting his own spin on sci-fi movies.
Yes.
Kind of reminds me of when I guess you could still say it does it, Quentin Tarantino, how he made a crime picture with Reservoir Dogs, but he put his own kind of spin on it. He did a karate movie, Kill Bill, but he put his own he made a World War II movie, but with Inglourious
his own
Basterds.
unique
So,
still.
yeah, it's interesting that 2 directors that I really like, and I just hope that Rian Johnson, he hasn't hit the big one yet, though. I wonder if this one with Bruce Willis could be his big one.
You know, Bruce Willis is very hit or miss. I mean, some of his films are just horrible and tank really bad, and others are big hits. And you make it a sci-fi movie about time travel, which I think a lot of people kind of get into these days. So this could be the one. I don't know. I'd be very anxious to see with that. So,
do you know the release on? It's just sometime in 2012.
I don't know the release date. That's a very good question. I probably should have looked that up. But
The intern should have checked that out.
I know we're going to have to really
Man.
talk to them about that. That's a real shame. No, I don't have that. I apologize. So we'll keep an eye out for that. So already in our news, you heard us talk about a few films that you may want to check out there, listening world. Haywire's coming out from Steven Soderburgh, along with maybe some other interesting films in the future. And then we've got Looper coming out, but we do recommend still go back and check out Brick and Brothers Bloom to see more of the Rian Johnson filmography. So, all right, so we're done with some news now. Let's jump on into our recommendations, if that works for you.
Sure.
Chris, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first.
I'm very excited about hearing you talk about this one.
Yeah, Alan knows. He saw my notes laying on the table.
Yeah.
So, the one I'm going to recommend. Now, I would not recommend this for everyone. Let me go ahead and just say that up front, because the film is definitely. I don't even know if the version I saw is rated or not. It's Red State.
We're getting late, boys. She wants all 3 of us at the same time. This is what happens when parents block porn sites, man. They make socially backwards kids.
Bet you boys want to get up to the devil's business, don't you?
So get drinking, because I ain't drinking alone.
Guys, is that you, Travis?
Welcome, family. Good evening. I hate the wickedness in America. rampant fornication, adultery, abortion, flagrant sexuality. Everywhere.
Kevin Smith's Red State.
Red State by Kevin Smith. This is the same Kevin Smith doing Mallrats and Clerks and Silent Bob, all of that.
All that stuff. And he, kind of interestingly enough, kind of like Soderbergh at one point has said, I think actually this movie was the one he said, okay, he had trouble getting distribution because of the subject matter, which we'll get to that in a second. And he was like, okay, this is my last movie. He was going to kind of walk away and not be a director anymore. But now supposedly he is planning at least one or two more movies.
One more right now.
So
a hockey movie.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So let me just briefly touch on what this movie's about. And it's interesting because, like you mentioned, Kevin Smith's prior movies, they kind of center around a same group of people, like teenagers making smart-ass comments and that kind of thing, and it's very slice-of-life type movies. This movie is more or less, it's a horror movie. It's a thriller/horror movie.
Interesting.
For him to do a movie like that. And also, there's not a lot of, in Kevin Smith movies, they're always like very topical references and like clever dialogue. None of that here. It's just, you wouldn't know it's a Kevin Smith movie. And the use of camera work in this movie is very interesting. They do a lot of kind of like the Spike Lee where the camera's set on a person, they're running down a hallway. The person's still because the camera's latched onto them, but behind them the background's all shaky.
Right.
A lot of that kind of stuff going on. But anyways, the plot centers around there are three guys who are on the internet, and it's kind of like an American Pie / Porky's type thing where they're in high school and they want to go have their first sexual experience. So they get on the internet, they find this woman, they're like, oh, okay, cool. And they suppose they're going to go meet her. Well, unfortunately for them, this woman is part of a more or less kind of a cult that captures people and then tortures them or does that. And so
that's why I don't let my kids on Facebook.
Right. So it's an interesting... And so then the rest of the movie is them trying to escape and what kind of happens within this like very, 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 very religious cult type thing. And the movie kind of has this, it's kind of done in two parts where there's that whole aspect to it, the religious cult aspect and these guys running around scared trying to escape. And then there's the whole attack or siege that happens with the ATF, kind of like a Waco, Texas type thing. And it's just interesting to see him go into this area of thought and filmmaking, just to see him do a horror movie. And I recommend it, but like I say, it has a lot of violence, a lot of gore, a lot of language, not for, young people. And then again, if you don't like this type of movie, don't bother. But if you're interested in Kevin Smith and you've seen his other stuff, it's just really interesting to see how he's decided to do this. And I will say, there's Michael Parks. Was in Tarantino's, I think he was in Tarantino's Kill Bill. He's been in a couple other things.
Okay.
He is the preacher in this movie. If I had my way, which the Academy does not listen to me, he would be nominated for Best Actor.
So despite all your letters you write to the Academy every day,
they continue to throw them in the trash or hopefully recycle them.
Right.
But Michael Parks was amazing as this preacher. He has to deliver, and there again, it's not a very Hollywood movie because he delivers like pretty much an unbroken 10 or 15 minute quote unquote sermon.
Yeah.
And it is amazing. And I think he's absolutely riveting in it.
Wow.
And so for that to be done, you just don't see that type of thing. And, he basically is a little bit unhinged, to put it lightly, but the way he delivers it and the menace he's able to bring to it is amazing. I mean, to me, it's akin to Christoph Waltz in Inglourious Basterds,
really?
Like the kind of domination. That guy, you see him on camera in Inglourious Basterds, Christoph Waltz, and you're like, okay, that guy, he's good. He's creepy good. He's just like, and sure enough, he ended up getting an Oscar, and you're like, well, yeah, he deserves it. I doubt, because this film didn't get a lot of distribution. I saw it on demand or Netflix or whatever, but it's in iTunes and everything. Not a lot of people saw it, so for that reason alone, he won't get any recognition. Yeah. But he was really good.
So Jay and Silent Bob do not appear in this film.
Nope.
I heard John Goodman's in the film, but he doesn't play Silent Bob.
No.
Okay.
And John Goodman, he's good anyway. He's a good actor. But for him, this was kind of to me, it felt kind of a strange role. It was a very everyman role, which I guess John Goodman does. But in a way, a lot of times when he does characters, they seem to be a little bigger, a little bit slightly larger than life, even though they are everyman characters. Mm-hmm. This guy was very just normal and very understated. And Goodman does a really good job. And Melissa Leo, who is in The Fighter and won an Oscar for that, she's in this. And it's a pretty important role, but I don't know. It's kind of surprising how she didn't have a little bit more to do. But for Kevin Smith to get two, because John Goodman and Melissa Leo, two really big actors in there.
Melissa Leo is coming off an Oscar win too for Mystic River.
The Fighter.
The Fighter. She was nominated. Wasn't she in Mystic River also, or have been nominated in the past for that? I'm getting my movies confused.
Could be.
Anyway, no, you're right. She's Oscar winner. And for this to kind of be one of her follow-up films, that was a pretty good coup for Kevin Smith to get her, John Goodman, and to put out what sounds like a very different film, which is I'm always in favor of directors doing something different.
And here's the one kind of downside to the movie for me. I liked it. The ending was a little strange, and I don't want to ruin anything, so I won't go into much detail about it, but it was a little strange, and I kind of felt like it was very rushed. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you to the internet. I read what was supposedly going to be the original ending, and it would have been mind-blowing. Wow. And it's a shame that they didn't... I mean, granted, he had enough problems getting distribution anyway, so I can kind of understand why he did what he did, but it would have been awesome. And not your stereotypical ending to a movie.
So this is a fairly new film. This is his most recent film, but yet it's out on Netflix. It didn't go the theater circuit.
Right.
Because they didn't get distribution. So it went straight to Netflix. You can get it online Netflix right now.
Yeah, and it's in iTunes as well.
Okay, great.
And from what I understand, I guess what he ended up doing was he actually went around to a couple of big cities. Somehow he missed Hickory. Yeah. But it did like Chicago and big thing. And he actually would show the film and then do a Q&A afterwards.
That would have been fun.
So, it didn't have distribution, but he self-distributed it.
Mr. Smith, if you're interested, the Footcandle Film Society meets once a month here in beautiful downtown Hickory, North Carolina. We would love to have you bring your film and do a little Q&A afterwards.
Sure.
Open invitation. All right. Thanks, Chris. My film, gosh, I feel like we're just talking about some depressing films today on today's show because Project NIM had its depressing moments thematically. Your film didn't sound like an uplifting, bouncy, happy film. Mine probably is going to bring us rock bottom here, I'm afraid. But staying with the theme of documentary from our feature, I wanted to try to pick out a documentary that I will say is one of my favorite documentaries, although it is one of the most uncomfortable, awkward things to watch I can imagine. It's called Capturing the Freedmans.
We had a middle-class home, educated. Where did this come from?
You would have to wonder what kind of a family situation could produce this kind of crime.
They're gonna put me in the movies.
I mean, I had no concept that this thing even exists in the world.
For me to be so outraged, it was like someone's worst nightmare.
They're harassing my father for no reason at all.
We'll make a film about a man that's sad and lonely.
Yeah, you've seen this. 2003 documentary. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. Basically, it covers a family, the Freedmans, mother, father, and then 3 sons. And what you start to learn is you find out more about this family. You learn about them, their dynamics. Not a perfect family. They have their own issues, even between husband and wife. But then the husband, who is a professor. He's a professor. He gets charged with child pornography, having child pornography, computer or whatever it may be. He teaches computer classes down in the basement of his house to young students. That starts an investigation into him that starts to bring up charges of possible molestation of the children that attended his computer class. And then it starts to get into a lot. The documentary does a wonderful job of never giving you any clear answers because they don't know either. It's not like the documentarian's trying to cloud you on purpose. It's showing you how convoluted this case becomes because all of a sudden then one of the younger sons actually becomes implicated as being maybe possibly the aggressor, actually doing some of the crime that his father is possibly taking the blame for, or maybe not. We don't know. The subject matter itself is troubling, very, very disturbing to watch. But the way this documentary was made, I was just riveted from minute one. And as disturbed as I was by what I was hearing, the way the documentary progressed, you wanted to understand more of exactly what was happening within this family.
Right.
Because there was just so much conflict between them all, the husband and the wife. They got divorced later on. He had to go to prison, but you never really know if he went to prison for the right reasons or whether his son got implicated in things. They're still questioned by the end of the film whether they did anything wrong at all,
right?
Which I think is just, It's one of those, it's kind of like Thin Blue Line in a way, about really questioning what had happened in the police procedure. There's a lot of fault dropped on all ends about whether the investigation was done properly or not. A lot of big questions. And it doesn't give you any clear resolution, but just to understand what all was going on with this family. You see some actual home footage with this family, which is just heart-wrenching to watch at times. I love this documentary as a documentary. I despise it for what it covers and talks about and has us see.
Sure.
But just something if you're into really looking at the human condition and the psychology of a family environment and police procedurals and what could go wrong in an investigation, this is a fascinating documentary to check into.
It's been a while since I've seen it. I don't know how recently you saw it, but they don't do any recreation stuff in that one, do they?
No, I don't believe so. I don't remember anything.
It's not like Man on Wire or Project NIM where they have certain things that they read.
They had photographs. It was a lot of interviews. Actually, I think the whole film was still interviews with family members and investigators and everybody else. They actually had some home video footage of the family, that they shot. Supposedly their father shot a lot of home video. And, that was one of those fortunate things where we have a lot of, it's just, I can't describe how disturbing it is to see home video of just what seems like very happy, just joyous family. And then you start to hear all these allegations. And the movie keeps you on your toes, not knowing which way you ought to feel. And I think the documentarian actually did a really good job of just playing it very fair. Right. It's like, here's the deal. Here's the story. Here's what the police say. Here's what the family says. Here's what their friends say. You kind of make it up on your own what you think happened truly here. Right. And to me, that's the way you make a documentary. So Capturing the Friedmans, not for the faint of heart. Not a very troubling subject matter, especially with all the things going on in the news these days, with some sporting programs, facing some allegations. It's a troubling subject, but we are reviewing this as a film, and as a film, I think it's a very powerful document.
Did it win an Oscar?
I don't believe so. No. I don't even know if it was nominated. Okay. I'm not even sure about that. Very interesting. Okay, well, I've just completely brought us down to about our bottom lowest emotional level here. But Red State from Kevin Smith and Capturing the Friedmans. I don't even have the director's name pulled up right here, but Capturing the Friedmans. Check that out. You can look that up as well. 2 films we think you ought to check out if it sounds like something up your alley. So with that, I believe we're done for the month. Good show. Good stuff to cover there. A few little ground rules we want to talk about our network and the show here. We do encourage you to send us any feedback or thoughts you have about the show. We look forward to it. We've got an email address at info@themesh.tv. That's THE mesh.tv. Send an email, say you're talking about Footcandle Films, and let us know what your question is, suggestion, ideas for a show in the future. We'd love to hear that. We also have a phone number now that people can call, 828-619-0048. That is a mesh line that you can call and leave a voice message for the mesh. If you leave a message, just say, hey, I'm calling about Footcandle Films, and either give us your question, your idea, suggestion. We would love to hear that voice message.
Could be your 15 seconds of fame.
That's right. And we'd love to play it on a future episode too if you have a question or an idea that we can incorporate into the show. So that's 828-619-0048 to call the Mesh line and to leave a voice message for Footcandle Films, or actually for any of our shows here on the Mesh Network. We do encourage you to check out more of the Mesh Network shows on themesh.tv, which is our website. And then we've also got our site up on iTunes, which you can go to. And if you look on the featured providers on the right-hand side of the iTunes podcast store, you will see the Mesh. And you can actually view all of the shows that we have available on iTunes for download. And give us some feedback, give us some star ratings. Let us know what you think of any of the shows on the network. We always love to get that kind of feedback. Special thanks to you, Chris, for, as always, being my co-pilot here on this show. And May Margaret Baker, our network manager, for keeping us in line and making sure we record when we're supposed to record. So with that, we're going to close it out. Thanks for listening to Footcandle Films. We'll look forward to speaking with you next month. Take care.
Watch films in the company of like-minded people in the dark. Watch films in the underground. We won't let anyone know where you are. The films that don't make it to Carmike at the mall, or ones that
Special thanks to Carpal Tuller for the show theme music. For more about Carpal Tuller, visit www.carpaltuller.com. You've been listening to The Mesh, an online media network of shows and programs ranging from business to arts, sports to entertainment, music to community. All programs are available on the website as well as through iTunes and YouTube. Check us out online at themesh.tv. Discover other network shows and give us feedback on what you just heard.
I had a couple little flubs, so if you want whatever tidying up you can do.
You know what I forgot to mention when you mentioned the Oscar host?
What's that?
Did you know and I guess now that Billy Crystal's agreed to do it, it was already started before the whole Brett Ratner, Eddie Murphy thing happened. There was a campaign on Twitter and probably on Facebook, although I'm not on it, to get the Muppets to host the Oscars. True story. I think that would be awesome.